Welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to briefly cover Genesys and why I think this could be the most interesting way to play Yu-Gi-Oh going forward, and I haven't heard anyone else talk about this on YouTube so far. I think that Konami is trying to solve one fundamental problem with the way that Yu-Gi-Oh exists, and you guys can let me know if I'm reading too much into this in the comments below. If you have never heard of Genesys though, let me briefly go over what Genesys is, because there are only really 4 points that they've already written out here that explain what it is. Then I'll tell you what fundamental design philosophy this is going after, and then I'll show you the hints and little tidbits that Konami has given us unusually as to why they have done this the way they have done it. Pretty interesting stuff. Okay, so first of all, what is Genesys? Imagine modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Except, one, there are no link monsters or pendulum monsters allowed. So we're going back to the original field layout, no extra monster zones, no pendulum zones. That's the first thing. The second thing is, there's no forbidden limited card list. Instead, there is a points list. This points list is capped at 100 according to the official Konami policy, but local stores can use any point cap they want, and they give examples of even 0, because there are only 505 cards on this list right now, as you can see right here, or 200, or whatever you want. So it's cool that they're leaving it up to the discretion of the local stores what they want to do with the actual points cap. But you can see here that cards that are banned, like Abyss Dweller, are at 100 points, and so effectively there kind of is a banned list in the sense that would you really use as your entire points one Abyss Dweller? Maybe it would make more sense to do it as an extra monster card, but I mean, for like a main deck card, like would you spend your entire allowance on one anti-spell fragrance? That seems like a pretty bad idea. So I feel like effectively there is something like a forbidden list, but because there is discretion at the local stores or events or whatever to have different points lists, I think that this could be very, very interesting. And obviously most cards don't cost 100. So it's going to be more interesting looking at, like, you know, something that's 33, like Brilliant Fusion, or Branded Fusion actually is 33. That's pretty interesting, you know. So maybe people who are interested in Branded could look at it, some way of playing Branded. So the standard points cap is 100, and those are basically the rules. That's it. It's very, very simple. Now, I think, before I get into their explanations as to why they've done this, that the main reason for doing this, the main problem this solves, is that unlike games like Hearthstone, Yu-Gi-Oh! Exists on paper, and that means that functionally you cannot errata cards. Yes, erratas exist in Yu-Gi-Oh!, but they are so astonishingly rare that there basically aren't erratas. Like, how many cards do you have in your deck that are errated? Probably 0. Almost no one has an errated card in their deck. There are very few of those that are played in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So the problem is, you can't just take something like Master Duel or any online simulator that is based on cards that actually exist in real life and just tune those cards because they were too overpowered. So, like, you can't just take X Ryziel and say, this is too broken, we shouldn't have done this, or we should have done this to sell the packs, but now we're going to tune it down. You can't do that. So what I think is interesting about this is the point system is kind of like a proxy for an errata, in the sense that you could release some new cards, like if Ryziel was just coming out, let's say, and X had no cost, and then as the formats progress, the cost of X goes up. Instead of the number of X being on the Forbidden Limited list, that will be a much more interesting way to force players out of a certain deck, but they can still play those cards if they want in this type of format, especially if the points cap is higher at a certain local event. So I think this is a very, very interesting way to get people to think about deck building. Now, I know people have pointed out, oh, but you can play like Vanquish Soul Canine with Izuna and all this stuff with the current points list. That's not the point. They have said that they're going to iterate very, very quickly on this list. So the current list as is does not really matter. The point is the philosophy behind this, because they've said they want to update it pretty frequently. Okay, so last thing I want to cover in this video is the things that they have said matter to them when designing this. So who it's for, honestly, they've written everybody here, but they do say that it's a less complicated game. I find that interesting because I don't know if that's actually true. I feel like there are enough cards on here that are still very complicated. Like, it's still actually modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Just without pendulums or links. So I don't know if it actually will be that less complicated, but it's interesting to see that they think so. They talk about how they're going to have an invitational. That's going to be cool. They're going to have a bunch of events where there will be Genesis events there. There's also going to be a YCS for Genesis, which is going to be very, very interesting, because that'll be like super top level stuff that we'll see when we actually get to the top. So that's cool. Then they also have an explanation for why they want to do a point system. Again, they say there are no forbidden cards, but I feel like functionally there actually are, but still in a much better way. Interestingly, they talk about specific combos being priced out. Like if there was an FTK, you could price that combo out instead of banning something entirely. So it could be like a healthier way of dealing with things that are toxic and then still allowing players to have access to most of those cards. Um, they also talk about identifying which cards they think are powerful and saying you can't have this many powerful cards in your deck. And what's cool about this is I feel like looking at this list, you can get an idea of what Konami thinks is broken or not broken. Like Atlantean Dragoons has a value of 40, and effectively this is kind of like a power ranking in a way if you look at these cards. Like if Atlantean Dragoons is 40, then you can't play 3 because it would go over 100. You could play 2 and go to 80, but then you'd have to check and see what else is actually. What White Forest cards are on here? So Diabel, Queen of the White Forest is 25. Elzet Azamina is 22. And Witch of the White Forest is 33. Okay, let's not focus on that right now. So anyhow, this is it's pretty interesting to see how they're basically power ranking their own cards. And they also mention here what happens if you were to design a deck and do really, really well, like a unique deck. They're not just gonna outprice you in the cost list afterwards, unless lots of people start playing that deck. So I think this is pretty interesting. I think it's going to make deck building more of a focus than it already is. Because, you know, we've had so many formats where it's basically like a few teams come together, they build one deck, and then everyone plays that deck. But I feel like this could be a much more interesting way of getting people to think about Yu-Gi-Oh! And deck theory and all that type of stuff. So anyhow, that is my take. Let me know if you agree on this idea that this is kind of like a proxy way of dealing with the fact that you can't errata cards because it exists on paper and it's not just an electric game. Anyways, thanks for watching and a lot more content coming soon.